Okay. Looks like we're ready to go. Seems like the slide is working. Everything can be seen. So great. Thank you for joining. Thank you for, excuse me on that, quick thumb there. Thank you for joining. Thank you for taking time out of your morning or afternoon, wherever you are coming to us from. Really, today's discussion is about Microsoft 365 E7. But more fundamentally, it is about how Microsoft believes work itself will be changing. E7 is not simply another licensing tier laid on top of what we know to be E3 and E5. It represents Microsoft formalizing a new operating assumption that AI is no longer an edge capability or a specialist tool, but a core participant in everyday work for information workers. And for years, productivity tools were passive. Users acted, tools responded. Copilot completely breaks that model. It drafts, it summarizes reasons, makes continuous recommendations, operating with user level authority, but at a machine speed, so much faster than the current paradigm can exist. And that's not an incremental change. It's ultimately a structural one. In this session today is really designed to help you determine whether E7 represents unnecessary over-licensing and overhead, or whether it actually is actually a rational response to pressures that you and your team are already experiencing as your Copilot usage expands. By the end of this, I will take a clear position on E7. For many organizations, actively scaling Copilot and E7 becomes worth it sooner than expected, not necessarily because of the features, but because the alignment between AI capability, identity, maturity, and a risk tolerance. And so let's move forward here. And so, before we get started, I always feel that it's worthwhile to share a quick snapshot as to who we are, Creospark, and why many organizations trust us in their Microsoft journey. So we were founded in 2017, and we've been focused on Microsoft services and the entirety of the Microsoft stack since day one. And that specialization and focus has helped us grow quickly and deliver consistent value. And so when you look at the time to market from our inception to today, we've amassed over 750 customers. We've supported literally hundreds of organizations across industries, whether they're nonprofit or healthcare entities, all the way up through large enterprise. And the unique thing about us is, given our experience in all these areas, we bring that unique cross-sector experience and focus to every engagement that we have. Creospark as an organization possesses 7 Microsoft Advanced specializations. For those of you here who don't know what those are, they are earned and not bought. Ultimately, they reflect a deep technical expertise and proven delivery models in areas like modern work, security, and Azure, all of which Creospark can help you with. Moving across to some of the differentiators that we have, 100% of our executive team are either Microsoft MVPs or alumni. And so this means that our leadership isn't just managing business, looking at spreadsheets. They're hands-on for discovery and core projects. Experts who are recognized by Microsoft for their contributions to the community, and interacting in each and every project that we have for our customers to ensure that you're getting the most bang for the buck and quickly and confidently moving from point A to point B in your journey. We do have dual headquarters both in Toronto, Ontario, and Davis, California. And so from an inception standpoint, we're a proudly Canadian organization, but have a significant presence in the United States. This allows us to support all of our customers across multiple time zones with local currency and local context for the projects they're working on. Organization, while relatively small and not the size of the typical, LSPs that some of our customers may be working on from a Microsoft EA perspective or large licensing vehicle. But what I do want to call out is that, our organization is about 120 people. Roughly 25-30% of our organization is on a technical delivery perspective. And so we're large enough to scale, but still very agile and personal. And so you never feel like just another ticket in our queue as we are working with you. And we have the right experts to bring to bear to every opportunity that you're encountering within your business. And, the collection of our staff, our leadership, brings over 100 years of combined transformational experiences. So our team obviously brings a multitude of decades of experience helping businesses like yours modernize, optimize, and grow for whatever that the paradigm of IT is shifting today. And so before we get into the content, which is, kind of why we're here today, I just wanted to dovetail on the prior slide and, really talk about our core offerings today, right? We're here about E7, we're here about licensing, we're here about AI and data, but Creospark can do a lot more. And what you'll notice here on this slide is that our go-to-market and how we solutionize our pillars is really attributable to Microsoft, which highlights the tight integration that we have. And so, AI business solutions, most individuals and companies understand this is modern work. And so in this area, we help any organization unlock productivity with tools like Copilot, agentic AI, building engaging intranets and portals, modernizing collaboration in Teams, SharePoint, and OneDrive. And whether that's a full enterprise migration or a simple digital experience refresh, we've done it time and time again and can certainly help your organization. Security, foundational. It's the pillar in the middle here. So just going to sip across and move dynamically. We manage endpoints, mobile devices, implement governance and compliance, and build a resilient Azure infrastructure with Windows 365, AVD, and backup solutions, all of which are designed for business continuity and to make sure that your data is secured, no one nefarious is accessing it, and you're able to continue to offer full value to your end customers for your profitability. Process transformation, this is the area, the legacy area of Power Platforms, D365 and AI, anything from low-code apps to data analytics with Power BI and Microsoft Fabric. We have an ability to help streamline workflows and unlock insights, right? The economy is in a state today where people are trying to do more with less. There are reams of data that oftentimes is unstructured and very manual in nature. We help organizations, irrespective of size and vertical, go and unlock those insights and allow you to be more responsive to your customers and ultimately unlock more profitability for your business. Lastly, as we move to the right, certainly important, we do offer a managed service and IT support. So that's a fully managed desktop experience and endpoint service, a 24/7 security monitoring, as well as quarterly financial analytics as a deliverable provided to help you optimize your IT spend, all the while, focusing on your security posture to ensure that you're more respondent to zero-day attacks and other threat vectors that seemingly are propagating exponentially day by day. Lastly, what I want to cover here is just the ongoing maintenance and support. Oftentimes customers embark on a journey, a project is done and completed, and individuals, information workers, technical people really just don't have any idea how to continue to manage that and how to continue to drive efficiencies within that newly created solution. And so, our model is ultimately that we stay with you post-deployment. We offer licensing, training, cybercrime mitigation, and flexible support hours to keep your environment running both securely and smoothly. Great. Promise to get into the content. My marketing team has advised me I do need to proffer a housekeeping slide, so I'm going to do that now. So bear with me for the next, 30 or so seconds. And so, we want to make sure that you are getting the most of today's journey, right? You've invested time, we've invested time. We want to make sure as a collective that everybody is gaining something from this. And so if you have questions, feel free to drop them into the chat. Q&A panel is being monitored and managed by our marketing team and our IT team. So either we will be able to provide on-the-spot responses or look to book time with you to have a bespoke conversation thereafter. Following the session today, we're going to have some useful handouts that are already prepared for you. So make sure you stay with us to the end. We will provide some guidance as to how you get access and some direction from there. And then lastly, there is a webinar giveaway. We want to make sure that beyond the information you're going to get today, that there is some sort of intrinsic value. Be on the lookout for that. That'll come later on the slide. So great. We've covered some introduction. We've covered who Creospark is. Let's get into the brass tacks of what we're talking about today and why we're all here, right? And so at a high level, this is what we're going to talk about from an agenda perspective. We are going to begin by grounding ourselves in why licensing has become strategic again after years of relative stability. For a long time, licensing decisions were largely incremental, right? Copilot has changed that dynamic. We're going to look and evaluate at E3, E5, and E7, not necessarily as the marketing tiers that you've seen on various slides or other information that you've seen on the web. But each tier carries implicit assumptions pertaining to scale, risk, governance, and those assumptions now matter way more than individual features. And so, subsequently from there, we'll talk about cost, the bundling, and renewal mechanics, because those decisions really never happen in a vacuum. They're not in isolation. And finally, to round out, we'll connect with adoption velocity, security maturity, and renewal timing. Obviously and clearly to arrive at a clear conclusion about when E7 becomes the rational choice for your organization. So quickly, just a little bit about me. My name is Jeff Schwalm. I run the sales organization here at Creospark. Excuse me, my mouse is acting up. I spent the last 19 or 20 years of my career in sales and technology leadership and consulting. Prior to joining Creospark, last year I spent the last 14 years of my career running enterprise and public sector at an LSP in Canada that is one of the top 3 in the Americas, and so certainly have understood every customer situation. Have also been a customer and walked a mile in your shoes too. I managed the Microsoft agreement for one of the charter 5 banks here in Canada. So I bring a lot of experience across regulated industries, including legal, public sector, manufacturing, and nonprofit. But my goal here really today and ultimately beyond today is helping organizations align their 365 usage to real business outcomes. And ultimately, I believe that's where the rubber hits the road in terms of how we and how customers make decisions in this new environment today. Going to do a quick poll here. I'm not sure if I can see it, so I'm going to rely on some of my marketing folks to help out with some of the answers here, but this is a portion of the interactivity today. And, before we get into detail, really just want to understand what's driving this conversation for you. It's great data for us. It's great data for you. It allows us to go back and have conversations that are, more befitting as to where you are in your journey. E7 doesn't come up randomly, right? There's always some pressure, whether it's a CIO, whether it's a colleague who has mentioned, we need to go and delve into this. So Prem, I'd ask you to launch the poll, and we'll do a quick pulse check. What's putting pressure on your license strategy today, right? Is it expanding Copilot access beyond a pilot? Is it the typical governance pressures pertaining to security, identity, and audit pressures? Maybe it's cost, right? I think we look at the economy and certain results that are being proffered to both Bay Street and Wall Street and other publicly traded areas globally. Cost predictability and complexity is a huge challenge, right? Many customers come up for renewal. Most customers on an EA program, over 40% of them are coming up for renewal within the next 12 to 18 months. That is a significant number of individuals who have a different cost schema and a different way of looking at things than they have previously, irrespective of how long they've renewed EAs. Fragmentation across licensing, right? It's complex, it's difficult. Microsoft doesn't make it easy, and thankfully that's why Creospark is able to go and help customers. We understand this. We have tight relationships to help you connect the dots from point A to B, or perhaps you're just exploring and learning and kicking tires in this conversation, and that's quite all right too. We love to have you. Obviously, not every conversation is apropos for where you're at today, but having said that, it's a great way to start. And so I now am starting to see some of the polling. We have about a little over half of the folks say that they're here to just explore and learn. A smaller percentage, looking at Copilot across, access being beyond a pilot for small user groups, right? And so, for those individuals who are just exploring and learning, this is a great opportunity for you to learn a little bit more and have a conversation about that. And, for those who are looking at, or who may have dabbled in Copilot, done a small pilot, done that, this is what we're seeing everywhere, right? You're not unique. A lot of customers are in the same situation, and value shows up quickly, demand starts to outpace governance, and we'll certainly talk to some of the features. So what I could say as a collective between the responses is that you're in the right place today, and I think there's something for everybody here today. And so I really look forward to getting into that with you all over the next 30 or so minutes. So cool. Like I said, who's this session for? E7 decisions today rarely belong to a single team, and that is part of what makes them difficult. IT teams feel operational strain as Copilot expands workloads. Security and identity teams see risk surface expand as AI operates with user-level authority. Finance teams experience cost growth that is no longer linear or easily forecasted. Procurement teams see Microsoft deliberately reducing modularity and operationality. Session assumes that all those pressures are valid, right? We're all seeing those irrespective of how large or small our organization is. And E7 exists precisely because those perspectives now collide in a single licensing decision. And if this conversation is approached, from a legacy angle, I can guarantee you that you're going to encounter friction in your organization, with your peers, with your subordinates, with your superiors. Goal today is not to persuade a single role. Like our goal as Creospark is to help you meet the mark in your license schema, but we're here to provide a shared mental model that allows these conversations to converge instead of being fragmented as they typically are, right? And so I spoke a little bit about the difficulties of licensing and, talking about why licensing becomes hard again, right? And so for nearly a decade, that Microsoft Enterprise license followed a really predictable rhythm, right? Organizations added workloads as needed. They went and negotiated renewals, maybe 18 months out or later if the customer was somewhat in arrears, and then somehow figured out a way to manage that incremental complexity. Productivity tools were assumed to be largely passive. People bought Project and Visio on a whim and didn't really think about how they went and did that. And Copilot really starts to break that assumption. It doesn't merely increase usage. It doesn't really do anything of the sort. It increased the authority. And so it drafts, it summarizes, it recommends, it acts across email, documents, meetings, chat, search, using the same permissions as the user. So it's very pervasive, but at a far greater speed and scale than a typical information worker was able to operate. And what this does is create some non-linear effects. A single over-permission user is no longer a localized issue. Copilot will quickly surface and can certainly go and combine and redistribute that access instantly. And so those traditional licensing models were really never designed to manage this type of amplification. And so as a result, licensing starts to become strategic again. It's no longer about that entitlement parity. It's more about what your licensing posture aligns with the assumptions that Copilot makes about trust, about access, and also about governance. And so as we go and expand, what we see here, what adoption looks like is that in most organizations, it begins this small, well-chosen group. And these users are typically digitally fluent. They're generally data aware, and they're motivated to use the tools, right? They're bleeding edge, and they want to consume that type of information and cutting edge type technology. And so Pilot really succeeds very quickly because there's faster motivation than otherwise expected based on use in that pilot group. But thereafter, that challenge emerges immediately afterwards, right? The value is obvious, the demand spreads, and leaders start asking why Copilot is not more broadly available. Governance mechanism, identity controls, access reviews, sensitivity enforcement are rarely rarely ready for that scale, rather, and this creates a governance debt, right? It's not visible on day one, but it begins to compound, not massively at the outset, but day by day, week by week, month by month, it certainly does compound it and has a snowball effect, right? Expectations become policy. Manual reviews replace systemic controls. Security teams start to observe risk and view that as the new normal. That process rather than architecture. E7 really exists because Microsoft has seen this pattern repeatedly, right? They have data, they've seen it, they interview and speak to organizations like us, customer organizations, rather large or small, as a way to help design how they roll out software, how they roll out technology, and what customers are looking for the next, say 12 to 18 to 24 and 36 months. And again, E7 exists because Microsoft has seen this pattern repeatedly, as I mentioned, and it ultimately is designed for the moment when Copilot stops being a pilot and becomes infrastructure in many customer environments. And so what E7 really is, and talking about the evolution of enterprise licensing, it really helps to take a step back and look at the evolution over time, right? E3 has been around for a while. It's assumed a very simple model that everybody knows and trusts today. Users create content, they collaborate, they communicate internally or externally. Productivity tools, very powerful, but also largely passive, and that risk was implicit and tolerated. Subsequently, E5 then emerged where security, compliance, regulatory pressure became unavoidable, right? Like this is what I mentioned a moment ago about some of the feedback that Microsoft gets and receives and how they go and make new products, right? E5 was born because E3 was missing features, right? Security, compliance, regulatory pressure became unavoidable. Content needed to be protected, needed to be audited, needed governance, right? That was the big thing that was missing in the E3 suite. Importantly, E5 didn't change how work was done. It really changed how work was controlled, right? And we saw that with internal controls being provided to IT and to other business units to make sure that there was a mitigation of DLP and other sort of ramifications that organizations actively saw through E5 and the lack of controls. So as we evolve, like E7 really assumes something is fundamentally different within that customer enterprise. It assumes that AI is now an active participant at work, right? It's not a trial. It's not someone on a Sunday afternoon creating an agent and seeing what works, right? It is synthesizing, it's making recommendations, it's creating drafts, it's acting, right? And this changes the operating model entirely. That it puts it back on its face from where it was, a decade or so ago, right? And where we see AI participated directly in work with identity design, access enforcement, security posture, those are no longer the supporting functions. They've ultimately become foundational, and Microsoft is no longer simply licensing tools. It's licensing an operating posture for that AI first work that I am aware you all are looking for today. And, candidly, so are we internally. And this is the point in the conversation where it's important to operate with precision and to be very, very precise. And that, Microsoft 365 E7 is not an arbitrary bundle. It's not primarily a pricing construct. It is really Microsoft making clear a architectural and operational statement about how AI needs to function inside of a modern enterprise today. We all know E5. We love it. Many of us have adopted it. We understand that it provides the security, the compliance, and the audit baseline. That baseline then goes and assumes that users are the primary actors. And so 365 Copilot starts to introduce something fundamentally new. An AI system that operates continuously across your documents, your meetings, your mail, your chat, and your search, acting with user-level authority. Going beyond that, Entra Suite provides the identity control plane that determines who AI can act as, what that can access, and under what conditions actions are allowed. And so when these components are licensed separately, organizations start to introduce some risk pertaining to sequencing, right? Copilot adoption tends to move a little bit faster than identity maturity. Certainly, at least that's what we've seen in our customers in our history. Security teams start to compensate with manual approvals, access reviews, exceptions, doing things way outside of policy that isn't necessarily the right thing for your organization. And over time, like I mentioned, when we started, that risk becomes absorbed operationally rather than architecturally. And what E7 does is it's removing that sequencing problem. It's encoding an opinion. If you're serious about scaling Copilot, identity-led security cannot remain optional or deferred or incremental. It must be assumed by default, and that's one of the biggest changes that we're seeing with this today. And so, just to dovetail on that, Copilot doesn't create new access problems. We hear this all the time that, what if my Copilot installation shares my CEO pay or sensitive customer information? If those problems exist, Copilot isn't surfacing those. Copilot isn't creating those. It's simply surfacing what already existed in your environment today. It's exposing existing problems instantly. Permissions that were tolerable in what was a human-driven environment become dangerous when AI operates continuously across workloads and at machine speed, right? Way faster than you or I could operate, and a higher propensity to go and expose those flaws in your environment. When AI becomes embedded in daily work, identity becomes a policy engine, right? Network location matters less. Data location matters less. What matters more is who Copilot is acting as, and under what conditions. And without that strong identity control, AI accelerates that risk instead of the value. And that's exactly why Microsoft is treating Entra as foundational in E7. Without that identity-led enforcement, AI again is simply amplifying the earlier mistakes and that debt that exists in some organizations. And with that, AI becomes governable at an enterprise scale. And so moving along, like when we start talking about E3 in a Copilot-led environment, these customer environments were designed ultimately for human-driven productivity, right? Recall when E3 was, incepted, I probably should have gone and found the date ahead of today's call. I didn't, but from my recollection, it was many eons ago. It almost feels like an eternity ago, right? AI was not anything that was prominent. It wasn't a conversation. It was, typically in Isaac Asimov books and a premise of a discussion for many individuals, right? Human-driven productivity is what we saw the inception of this, right? There was not a AI-mediated execution. In governance is largely manual, as everyone knows, right? Identity controls are coarse-grained. Policy enforcement relies heavily on people and process, right? The two Ps. And this certainly can work with narrow Copilot pilots, small organizations, specific business units. But when you start moving at scale, it fails quickly. Administrators move to exception management, like we chatted about on the preceding slides. Security teams start to absorb that risk, like we chatted about through human review. Identity teams continue to struggle to adapt static group models to dynamic AI usage. And so that true cost of E3 in a Copilot environment isn't at all a license price. It's that operational tax that's paid, collectively in time, in risk, in acceptance, and also that consistent human oversight that clearly is required there, right? As we move on to E5, certainly more enhanced, a little bit better, significantly improves the security posture, but Copilot starts to, or continues rather, to introduce themes in that schema. Copilot remains an adaptive license. Identity maturity advances incrementally, I'd say at best. Cost forecasting becomes complex as adoption varies by role and function, and this is where we see a lot of organizations, stall. It's not because the technology suite in E5 is insufficient, far from that, but it's because that the customer operating model becomes fragmented, right? Planning becomes reactive. Decisions become piecemeal. More people are involved, and more stakeholders need to have a conversation, right? And where Microsoft created E7, which moved to general availability at the start of this month, is largely to resolve this stall by restoring coherence across AI, identity, and security. So let's talk a little bit about what E7 actually changes, right? It starts to remove those decision points that I highlighted on a few slides ago, right? And that's, ultimately one of the largest premises of value that we see in this suite. It starts to assume AI scale, that there's a level of identity maturity and security depth by default. And so instead of asking in an organization who should get Copilot, what BUs, what users, what information workers, it starts to become which identity features are required and how security should scale. And E7 answers those questions up front. This trades flexibility for predictability, which goes back to where we were, a decade ago in terms of the difficulty with licensing and how we predict future cost, scalability, and efficacy with the stack that we bought, and what that means for the future in terms of our organizations moving to frontier, and or ultimately how we service our customers. And so for organizations who are scaling Copilot to be a little more broad, predictability is often way more valuable than that incremental optimization. That certainly can still exist, but it's the predictability that E7 is bringing to the forefront. And once you start to accept that AI participation must be assumed for your user base versus an optionality, that cost conversation begins to fundamentally change. And so, a slide here, standalone components, about 117 per user. If you were to buy them on whole, the Microsoft E7 suite, about $99 per user. This is the point in the discussion where cost naturally starts to come to the forefront. And it's important that we're really explicit about what the problem is that we're actually trying to solve. Most organizations start this analysis with, a route list price math, right? It's E7 plus Copilot plus identity plus security add-ons versus that E7 bundle. And that arithmetic is directionally useful, but it's not the real decision and likely not where any of you should be focusing your time. That real cost issue where Copilot is not the headline price, it's the cost predictability at scale. And so Copilot adoption doesn't need to expand evenly. Some teams are going to adopt it more aggressively, some less so, others lag. Modular licensing creates a variability that finance teams struggle to forecast, and also procurement struggles to manage midterm, right? And as adoption grows, organizations often discover that identity and security investments are pulled forward reactively. That happens time and time again. Controls are routinely added because risk appears, not necessarily because they're planned, right? And it's those unplanned investments that rarely show up in those initial cost comparisons. And that is what I'm encouraging you to look at, right? And that is why E7 is prominent, because it starts to replace some of that variability with a fixed operating assumption. You're not buying a cheaper license. You're buying insurance. You're buying fewer surprises, fewer midterm adjustments, fewer emergency investments driven by audit findings or security pressures. And for many organizations, that predictability is certainly more valuable than the marginal savings they may incur by looking at various workloads or components and trying to piecemeal a solution for your environment. Like I mentioned, right, on the preceding slide, and I'll delve into this a little bit more, is that simple cost comparisons fail because they assume a static environment. It's the 21st century. I don't think that there's any static environments that exist today, and I'd argue that there likely hasn't been since the dawn of the internet era. Copilot adoption is anything but static. It's completely changed the paradigm and in fact, enhanced the pace of change, the rate of change that we see. And, certainly everyone's different. Some teams find immediate value and expand quickly. Others move far more cautiously, and that uneven adoption creates uneven cost exposures when licensing is modular, like I mentioned a moment ago. Risk tolerance also compounds that effect. Organizations with lower risk tolerance tend to invest earlier in identity and security controls. Organizations that have a higher tolerance delay those investments. They're often paying later through remediation, accelerated upgrades, or forced licensing changes, which is why we're having this webinar today and why we're encouraging you all to think clearly and rationally about the direction in which you're moving to, right? Timing dominates everything. An organization evaluating E7 6 to 12 months before renewal has leverage. They have flexibility. An organization forced in that conversation midterm often has far fewer options, even if that underlying need is very, very clear. And that's why, cost comparisons in isolation consistently lead to poor decisions, right? Everyone's environment, everyone's enterprise is very unique. And so that context, that risk posture, timing matter far more than simple arithmetic. And, that's an area where Creospark can help by having a bespoke conversation and ensuring that you are meeting the frontier notion where you need to meet with the governance and risk and mitigation at the forefront of all of those conversations. And so, again, to continue this call, right, and what those customer journeys are, E7 rarely going to be a sudden leap, right? In practice, it's almost always the destination that organizations are going to arrive at after a series of incremental decisions. One common journey that we're going to see is that it starts in E3 or E5. followed by a limited Copilot deployment. And as that value becomes more visible internally to finance or executive stakeholder or others in that organization, that demand will start to cascade, snowball, and grow, right? And at that same time, the strain on governance increases. Identity, security controls that were sufficient for that, legacy E3 human-driven work start to feel a little bit brittle. And change is certainly required at that point. Another common journey that we see starts in E5. Copilot's added as a separate component. Over time, the entitlements in the suite become to, start to fragment. Different groups carry different licensing for the procurement teams or organizational teams that are looking to ensure, auditability and success with contracts you bought. Cost forecasting becomes exceedingly difficult. That consolidation at E7 becomes attractive, not just because of the features, but because it restores that coherence that we spoke about earlier in today's session. And so what we see, far less frequently now is the stronger long-term hybrid states. And so once fragmentation costs more than consolidation, operationally, financially, or certainly from a risk perspective, E7 starts becoming more and more of a rational destination for our customers. And so, you may be asking yourself, like, what signals, when do I understand this is going to be relevant? What benchmark should I choose? Where's the schema where I need to make a decision? And, there are consistent signals that indicate when an organization is approaching the D7 moment. And I'd say one of the earliest is expanding demand for Copilot beyond the original pilot population. At the same time, identity reviews, security audits begin to surface, uncomfortable findings, permissions that were tolerated, again, in that human-driven environment start to become problematic when AI is operating continuously across them. Operationally, governance starts to shift towards exceptions, manual approvals replace policy, right? Compensating controls proliferate. None of these signals necessarily indicate failure, but they certainly indicate that success from an AI perspective is outpacing governance, right? And this is, again, why I focused on this during the webinar, right? When these signals start to appear together or in confluence, E7 can become a very practical conversation, not because it's fashionable, not because it's, an approximate time to June 30th, which is Microsoft's year end, and largely to find some discounts or an opportunity to make a deal, but it's because that the existing licensing posture no longer matches reality. And that is why E7 has really come out. And so let's talk about it. I know we got about 20 or so minutes left. And so I want to make sure that we're on time and have a little bit of time to focus on some closing aspects of this. But, organizations looking at why E7 is too early, right? And just as important as knowing when E7 makes sense is knowing when it doesn't. E7 is not a default answer for every organization, and adopting it too early can certainly create its own form of misalignment, which is, something that we're taking great pains to avoid. If in your organization Copilot value is still unproven, obviously we can help with that, but broad licensing can create skepticism rather than momentum. Users may not necessarily understand how AI fits into their workflows, and leadership may struggle in that construct to connect the spend to outcomes. In any of those cases, E7 can absolutely feel like a cost ahead of clarity, right? And limiting scope is another signal where E7 may be premature. When Copilot usage is not intentionally constrained to narrow roles or to experiments, the assumptions embedded within E7 are not yet being exercised. And so the operating model has not changed. Consolidating licensing too early can introduce shelfware, right? We want people to go and use what they buy and use it immensely. That's how people derive value and drive ROI. And finally, renewal leverage matters, right? I know there's, organizations without contractual leverage, they sometimes can face constrained choices. In these cases, sequencing matters more than consolidation, and E7 works best where there's adoption intent, where there's governance readiness, and contract timing, all in which to move together simultaneously. And so aligning to intent, as a matter of fact, licensing decisions should follow intent, not pressure, right? It is your prerogative when you go and add this. It is your business when you go and make decisions as to how you unlock the benefits that Microsoft have provided for your organizations to help deliver an ROI to your organization. And again, it should follow intent, not pressure. Organizations that articulate how broadly Copilot will be deployed, how quickly adoption will expand, and what risks are acceptable consistently make better decisions, right? For planning saves work. That's clear in any endeavor. Without this clarity, licensing becomes reactive. Anytime we have to operate reactively, we're not thinking of the full ramifications of those decisions and oftentimes start paying more, whether that is at work or in our personal lives. Decisions are driven by user demand, security findings, renewal deadlines, rather than that strategy that we're imploring you to undertake. And again, Creospark can help you guys explore those areas. That's where fragmentation and regret appear, and we want to avoid that piece. E7 works best when leadership is bought in. They're aligned with a core premise that AI is no longer experimental. It's foundational to your business and foundational to how you service customers and derive profit for your own customers. Once that premise is agreed upon, licensing starts to become aligned and to enable it rather than to constrain it. And it becomes a vehicle for how you drive further and deeper and how you service those customers better and derive more efficiency and profitability in your business. So why renewal time matters. Microsoft has announced significant changes on the Microsoft EA program. Waterfall discounts have evaporated. Discounts are consolidated on a certain level. CSP has become a more prominent conversation, right? And there's a lot of change going on today, right? There's windows, there's constraints, there's forced decisions like we chatted about, and renewal timing often exerts an outsized influence on, not just E7 decisions, but any licensing decision that you're going to encounter. And organizations that have an approaching a renewal certainly have leverage. Can restructure, have an ability to restructure licensing deliberately, realign entitlements, negotiate with intent. Again, areas all of which Creospark can assist with as you help organize. Organizations who are midterm in their agreement often face constraints. Even when there's that need for E7 and it's clear, sometimes those contractual mechanics limit that flexibility. And that is why many E7 conversations feel rushed or uncomfortable, because there are certain times where it makes sense and certain times where it doesn't. But the best E7 conversations to kind of round that out is really those that are made proactively, not under deadline pressures. Timing matters just as much as readiness, right? And again, I'll create another Creospark plug, all of which we can help you with, whether it's timing, whether it's strategy, whether it's an overall assessment of readiness. These are all areas that we can help from both an advisory and a project-based perspective. And so, as we conclude the webinar today, we'll share with you some contact vectors so you can take advantage of some of the expertise that we have on our team and our side. But really rounding out, just bringing this all together, we recommend a very simple framework. First, understand the adoption trajectory, how quickly Copilot will expand, how broadly it will be used. Secondarily, assess identity maturity, whether those access controls and governance can scale with AI usage. Thirdly, evaluate contractual timing and leverage, right? When all three of those elements align, E7 is often the cleanest and least risky answer. And so when one of those lags, sequencing starts to matter more so than enthusiasm. And this framework here really consistently produces better outcomes than feature-based or price-based comparisons or negotiations or discussion. And so, moving on, I'm going to go a little bit quicker because I know we're getting out of time and I'm respectful of the hour that you took with me today. But where E7 signals Microsoft's direction, and natural question at this stage is why Microsoft is doing this now, right? It's not to capitalize on profitability. It's not to do anything nefarious or anything of the sort. And the answer is quite clear and simple. It's that Microsoft is watching how Copilot moves from experimental deployments into day-to-day operations. There is a clear customer demand to help expand upon this. As Copilot starts to and continues to become that default, the cost of weak identity, fragmented security, inconsistent governance increases exponentially. Microsoft is also standardizing expectations. And so they are ultimately signaling that AI at scale requires a baseline level of identity maturity and security posture, right? The time to catch up is now before we're all left in the dust. Microsoft E7 is encoding that expectation into the licensing model, right? It started, I don't know, today's the 21st, 20 days ago, right? A little less from a business day perspective, but it's simply not an upsell. It's Microsoft reducing variance, limiting the edge cases that were always kind of bubbled up at the surface, and standardizing on an operating model that is believed to be required for AI first work. And I think many of you on today's call would likely agree with that. And so what I want to do as we move to the kind of end game and the conclusion of this session today is really zooming out, right? And regardless of whether an organization adopts E7 in calendar 26 or calendar 27, or frankly not at all, what is clear is that is Microsoft's direction. Copilot is not at all being positioned as a premium add-on or some sort of experimental capability. It is a default layer across your productivity streams in the enterprise. And when Microsoft treats something as a default, they may redesign the platform around it. And that's exactly what is happening here today. Again, identity is becoming a control plane and not the network. Security is becoming continuous and not policy-driven, and not perimeter-based. Licensing is moving away from modular assembly towards standardization assumptions about how AI, identity, and security must work collaboratively together. E7, not the destination, but rather it's the baseline that Microsoft believes organizations will need to operate safely and predictably in an AI-first world. Even organizations that choose not to adopt E7 immediately should certainly understand that this is not trivial, and this is the direction of how Microsoft and other organizations of the same are going to move. And so a lot of information, 47 some odd minutes, our opinion, and at this point, our position should be unambiguous. For organizations that are expanding Copilot beyond early pilots, I believe, and it is the belief of our organization, that E7 becomes the least risky and most operationally coherent choice. It doesn't at all mean that E7 is right for everybody. It doesn't mean that every organization should buy it yesterday. What it means is that for many customers, E7 solves problems that modular licensing struggles with scale, fragmentation, sequencing risk, governance drift, cost unpredictability. These are the most important distinctions, right? And E7 is not about buying more technology. It's about aligning licensing with how AI actually operates inside the modern enterprise. And whether Copilot is acting continuously on behalf of end users, identity maturity, or security depth, that can no longer be optional. For many organizations, E7 is not the cheapest option. We saw this in the pricing, right? But it is the cleanest option and increasingly the option that reduces risk rather than shifting it into people, process, and expectations. And so what is our role? What is Creospark's role here? It's quite simple. Our role in this conversation isn't to blindly advocate for E7, far from it. Our role here is to help you make the right decision deliberately with eyes wide open. At Creospark, we focus on three things really, right? We focus on readiness first. So we assess how Copilot is actually being used today, how identity and security are configured, where governance friction is already appearing. Secondly, scenario modeling. We help customers understand multiple paths forward, right? There's not just one, there's several. What it looks like to remain modular, what it looks like to consolidate into E7, how timing affects both cost and risk. These are especially important around renewals, where rushed decisions tend to age very poorly. Lastly, a real strategy, right? Many customers, many E7 conversations, rather, happen because contracts force the issue, not because organizations plan for it. Our goal here is to move customers out of that reactive decision-making construct and into intentional alignment. And that's what we're looking to do with each and every one of you on the call today. And so our role in this conversation and where we help, how we help, just to expand upon that, and to continue the key takeaways is that, Copilot fundamentally changes how work is done. Licensing decisions must thusly go and relate and reflect back to that reality. And for many organizations, E7 provides that alignment needed to scale AI responsibly, and that's aligning capability, identity, maturity, security posture, and cost predictability. That consistent lesson across customers is this, and it's that thoughtful alignment beats reactive licensing every time. And that's what we want to leave you with today. So as we move on, we will not have time for Q&A today. And what I would say here is that at this point, the most useful questions are very user specific. It relates to your user timing. It relates to your Copilot rollout plans, the governance friction that you may or may not already be seeing in your environment today. And these real world scenarios are where these decisions become clear. That this is the moment to pressure test assumptions, not not debate features. Goal of today's session isn't to sell a SKU or to have conversations that are more junior in level, but really it's here to provide a clear way for you to think about licensing in an AI first world. And this is where that thinking turns to practical next steps. And so what I mean by that is that following today's session, you're going to receive all the collateral from today. You'll receive the transcript, the recording, some notes and one-pagers from Creospark and some detail about the E7 licensing. I believe you're certainly going to have questions. It is relatively new. We're talking about 20 days ago that this became available from a GA perspective. My recommendation is quite simple. Let today's session marinate, let it sink in. For those who are from Canada, you just had a long weekend, and the weekend's coming. For those who are in the U.S., Memorial Day is coming. What a perfect opportunity to start conjuring up, some thoughts upon this with the extra long weekend. But certainly review the collateral that was sent. Book time directly with me to speak to your specific scenario, and also how Creospark in conjunction with Microsoft can help you on your journey. Regardless of where you are in a pilot, or you are an active user, or looking for governance or security assistance, Creospark can assist you in all facets of your journey, irrespective of your starting or originating spot. Our team will follow up with everyone who both registered and participated today. You will receive my contact detail. You will receive the collateral, as I mentioned. You'll receive some contact vectors to get back in touch with us to set up a time that we can have a real conversation about your business and where you are and how Creospark can help, or certainly to provide additional information following this, right? And so again, what I'd say is another thing is that we are having conversations with many customers, not only about E7, but about the price impacts coming July 1. And so please join me. We will include details next month. It is in mid-June, but we will run another webinar to dovetail on this E7 conversation to help organizations reduce M365 licensing costs ahead of your next renewal. And so if you found value in today's session, you will certainly find value in next month's session, where we take all of what we talked about today and then create and discuss clear purchasing plans and strategies as you embark on your renewal and your further investment in Microsoft technology. Going to leave this up for a minute here. I just wanted to thank everyone, both internally and externally, for joining today. But what I do want to say to our external folks is that your feedback is really valuable. It helps us improve our webinars, create quality content for everybody here on the line, right? And so I would appreciate any feedback, both positive and constructive, to make any sort of webinar, whether I lead or others in our organization, more impactful and more beneficial to you. We understand that you are taking time out of your day, taking time away from your business, and we appreciate that investment you are making in Creospark. There is a QR code here that's flashed up in the slide. I'll talk for another 20 seconds. So you can pull the cameras out and grab that QR code. But this is how you access the survey. So scan that code on the screen. Anyone who goes and completes that survey will be entered into a draw for a Amazon gift card that we will announce as we send the collateral out following today's session, likely at some point next week. With that, that concludes our session today. Once again, I want to thank you for your time. I appreciate you joining today's webinar. Please do keep an eye on the inbox for all the collateral, all the details from today's session. Please do keep an eye out for our session in June when we talk about the price increases and how we can ensure that you're protected the best way forward. But ultimately, I look forward to having conversations with each and every one of you about your customer experience, and how you evaluate E7 and how Creospark can assist you in that journey. Thanks again for your time today. Have a great long weekend for those in the US, and have a great rest of your day for everyone here on the call today. Thank you.